Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to this, the launch of Blue Door Press, and the first two books for which it has been responsible. My name is William Marshall. In a former existence, I was a medical writer and author, and I'm now, I gather, a copy editor for Blue Door Press. I'm the guy with the bow and arrow on the website, although I would point out to you that the target was only about 3 meters away when I was in. The structured part of the evening is going to comprise my giving a short description of the press, how it came to being and what it sets out to achieve. I'll then introduce Jane Kirwan, who will read from her book, Don't Mention Me, published by Blue Door Press. And after Jane's reading, I'll introduce Pamela Johnson, who will be reading from her book, Taking in Water. Both Jane and Pamela, as I'm sure you know, are prize and award-winning and widely published poets, and I'm sure you'll enjoy listening to them. And there are still some of Pamela's books available at discounted rates. Unfortunately, we've sold out of Jane's for the moment, but if you want to buy copies of her book and have not been able to this evening, she will explain later how to do that. And at the end of Pamela's reading, the two of them will join together and introduce a surprise guest about whom I will say nothing further. So back to Blue Door Press. The idea for this venture grew out of a group of women writers of both prose and poetry who had been meeting mainly in London over a period of some 10 years and their experiences in trying to get their work published. As many of you will know from your own experiences, I'm sure, commercial publishers are increasingly cagey about taking on new authors, particularly of poetry and literary fiction. It's not very good in academe, I can tell you. Even authors with a couple of books to their name are having difficulty in getting published. As literary agent Rupert Heath told Pam, publishers may have become a little over-wary, having had poor luck with recent literary fiction, including work by previously award-winning authors. The market certainly is tough all round, especially for the more thoughtful kinds of literary fiction. Jane and Pamela wanted to find a way around this barrier, in part with regard to their own work, but also, and importantly, to help others publish and promote their work. So they went to seminars on self-publishing. They learned how agents work and researched the use of social media, an essential tool, of course, for promoting work if you don't have a commercial publisher's budget behind you. They drew up a business plan, discussed it with others and refined it, always aware that if they went ahead, it meant a considerable commitment and that would inevitably take time away from their own writing. But on the positive side, they were driven by a desire to take control over the publication and promotion both of their own work and that of other deserving writers. Pamela and Jane were clear from the outset that Blue Door Press would need to be a professional venture and that its books would need to be expertly edited and designed. Unusually in publishing, it will be the responsibility of authors, both practically and financially, to organise this. Although the press will be able to provide advice and, as we grow, access to members of the venture who have the requisite expertise. Essentially, Blue Door Press is a collective, a cooperative enterprise of writers and readers, and it is expected that new writers seeking to have their own work published will be prepared to contribute their own skills to the overall enterprise, as well as benefiting from the skill of other members. I've already mentioned the importance of social media in Blue Door's promotion plans, and as you'd expect, we have a Facebook page and a website, and have started a regular e-newsletter. 2 novels have been launched this month, Taking in Water and Don't Mention Her. Both have women at the centre of their stories, women facing issues that interest the authors and which they believe will connect with readers, both men and women. But the press will not only be about novels, we are hoping to publish, in addition, short stories, memoirs and poetry. But enough of me. Jane and Pamela will be happy to answer your questions about the press and how it's going to work after the readings, and I will be at the book table and happy to continue to sell you copies of their books. So first is Jane Kirwan reading from Don't Mention Her. Jane was born into a family defined by religion and medicine. These are her own words. Her Irish Catholic parents were both doctors in Northampton, and she worked for many years in the UK, in Africa, and in Ireland as a dentist. She now lives part of the year in London and part in Czech Republic. Her published works, as some of you will know, include collections of poetry published by Rockingham Press, The Man Who Sold Mirrors and Stealing the Eiffel Tower, and a remarkable joint venture, probably of poetry and prose with her partner, Alish Maharchik, called Second Exile. Jane is currently working on a collection of poems inspired by the Czech village in central Bohemia where she lives for part of the year. Don't Mention Her is her first novel, and it's a great pleasure to ask her to read from it.
Thank you. I'm going to read very briefly. We're both going to read very briefly. Don't Mention Her follows an extended family over 50 years following the death of a 5-year-old. This is Connie's daughter Claire, and they both concern the child's mother, Connie. In the first, Connie has gone to London with her sister on a course. They're both doctors. Claire is alive and well, back home with her brother and cousin, being looked after by her father, Liam. So this is the very beginning, and it's set in 1963. And if I'm too loud or too whatever, just yell. A sea of white linen tablecloths. The hotel dining room had been abandoned. Connie finished off her rashers and tomatoes. She needed more toast. She poured the dregs from the silver coffee pot, examined her hands. Freezing outside, the knuckles red from her morning dash to get cigarettes. She must buy gloves. The waiter grabbed her plate in case, God forbid, she had plans for more. There was a phone booth in reception. She dialed Liam. The poor man sounded exhausted. The girls were asleep, but I managed to dress Rory. Her sister Pat might imagine they were in London to get credits towards their diplomas. She was here to have a break from the practice and the children. Pat's idea to get more strings to their bow. In general practice, there'd always be assistants, always second fiddle to their husbands. She must repeat that to Pat when her sister returns from praying. Liam would leave the girls to sleep until Mrs. M came. The house is freezing, he said. I've no chance to get more than the kitchen fire lit. Rory was up most of the night. The man was a martyr. Well, about time, she must investigate more excuses to escape. Apparently her niece had been reading to Rory and Claire before bedtime, got carried away. Nell scared them half to death. Nell's on holiday too, Liam. Give her some treats. The child was only visiting for a few days. Liam had better not take advantage. Connie smiled soothingly at a woman waiting to use the phone. She had an hour before the first lecture. Would pop into Dickens and Jones. I've been abandoned. Pat's flown off on a carpet of sanctity to hear Mass in the oratory. I must go, Con. Rory is screaming. Enjoy yourselves while you can. Only 2 more days. The man was counting the minutes. So this bit, who is that Scarlett making that row? This is another, a little bit briefer, you'll be pleased to hear. It's after the Claire had died. Connie was in London, and she's disappeared. It's the day of the funeral, and Connie has disappeared. Connie walked into Perkins' department store, straight past the makeup ladies gossiping behind their counters to the lift. The relief to get out of the cold. She should have worn gloves. Don't think, get on with it. Now she was in the warm, she would remember what she needed. The car would be safe parked where it was. She'd only be a few minutes. The lift smelt of Chanel No. 5 had mirror walls. The lift boy refused to look at her, kept his eyes on the ground. She checked. She was a sight. Black rags of hair loose over her fur collar. She looked like a witch. The boy had gold braid on his cap and jacket and barely reached her waist. He was much too short, far too young. They were hiring children illegally and dressing them up. Pat would have it reported immediately. Her sister's face the night she and Dermot arrived. The pious concern. Pat would be unbearable. This is the third, madam, he said for the second time. The boy looked anxious as if Connie might not ever get out. All those people on the other floors banging on the bell would be extremely angry. Could he smell the drink? She'd only had the smallest tot. The third floor looked wrong, but she couldn't decide why. "Can I help you, madam?" The assistant had appeared from nowhere. "A black coat. I need a black coat." The woman was trying to be helpful, but was clearly confused. "For you, madam?" "Of course for her." The sales assistant stood there, a great lump of gormlessness. Connie waited. Then they both looked round. Racks of children's clothes, rows of them, a whole floor of children's clothes. On the ground floor was a booth selling watches. That's what she needed. She would never hold on to a watch. "It's 12:30, madam," said the ball man behind the counter. They would be going into the church. The house would be empty. Pamela Johnson!
Thank you very much, Jane. And now for Pamela Johnson. Pamela has been running writing courses in schools, community groups for the University of the Third Age and the Arvon Foundations for some 15 years, and is currently an associate tutor at Goldsmiths College in the University of London. She previously worked as an independent critic, curator and lecturer on contemporary visual art, both in radio broadcast and print media. Her two previous novels are Under Construction and Deep Blue Silence, both of which will be reissued by Blue Door Press next year. She's currently working on a fourth novel and a collection of poetry, and I now invite her to read from Taking in Water. Pamela.
Hello. Is this working? Can you hear at the back? Yes. Okay, thank you, William, and thank you, Jane, for that intriguing introduction to Connie. And thank you all for coming. Some of you have come a long way. Okay, so I can tell you this takes less than 5 minutes, in case you're wondering. My book, Taking in Water, is set in Yorkshire and in New York. It travels in time between 2002 and the 1950s and 60s. 2002 means that it's almost 50 years since the sea smashed through Lydia's grandmother's front door and swept away her family, leaving her with a terrible secret. Now she lives alone in a remote cottage on the coast. She's an artist, and as the book starts, significant objects have begun to wash up on the shore nearby. So this is how the book starts with Lydia. "It's the gate," Lydia said out loud, relieved to have identified the source of the noise. How come it was open? She could have sworn she'd locked it. She removed her eye mask, and as the lighthouse beam passed over the window, she checked her clock. 2 a.m. The banging gate meant a storm on its way. She'd have to shut it. Couldn't afford a sleepless night, not if she was to get on with her search before high tide tomorrow. Wide awake now, she was alert to every sound. The gale coming in off the sea plucked at the roof timbers, a creaking above her that snatched the years away. Each gust pitching her back to Grandma's house until she's 7 again, peeping through the letterbox, watching the sea swallow the road, spray leaping above the gate, and wondering how a gate could ever keep out the waves. Pulling the duvet over her head to deaden the sound, she shut her eyes and called up the wreck. It was the only way to stop images of that night filling her head. No bodies, no funerals. She'd made herself imagine the wreck because she couldn't bear to think of her family forever drifting and pulled by the currents. There's no wind, no rain, no weather at all on the bottom of the sea, and she liked to think of them, serene on the sea floor, gazing through swishing curtains of fish. Her wreck is rusted, encrusted with barnacles, but it's solid, bedded in the soft sand of Dogger Bank, out there where the sea is shallow. Luke was the only person she ever told about her ghostly wreck. Telling him her fantasy led to the art they'd made and a different kind of storm. She'd never managed to tell anyone, about the other images that lived in her head. Images of that night that she didn't make up, that had taken years to surface, and that she didn't want to invade her right now. Her father climbing on the table, prodding the ceiling with a poker. Her looking down on Grandma's sitting room as the sea rushes in to grab an armchair. The table's floating like a boat. Everything's floating. Grandma's spectacle case, Father's trilby, the doll's arm. Images that flickered like stills from a film out of order until she had to hum that tune, that silly hymn. Otherwise, the images might splice together, speed up towards the last frame. She didn't dare on the whole film. Not yet. If she could make this new work, maybe then she could finally admit what happened that night. A drumming on the skylight cut in and told her the downpour had arrived. She'd have to tog up if she was going to fix the gate. Here, she was hundreds of feet above the shore. No chance of any waves forcing themselves through her gate, however big the storm. And a storm meant more stuff was being washed up at Slayton. There'd be plenty to find after a night like this. Downstairs, she pulled on her fleece and a waterproof, stuffed her feet into cold wellies. Torch, torch, she muttered to herself, and then remembered. Bugger, it's in the studio. Well, the lighthouse beam would have to do. If she didn't get out there soon, that gate would be off its hinges. Thank you. As William mentioned, Blue Door Press is a writer-led initiative, and Jane will join me now as we do our little Ant and Dec moment and announce our latest writer is going to join us. But before we do that, Dec's lost her. She's hopeless, you know. I have to organise her all the time. I really need to thank some of our wonderful group of associates who are in the room here tonight. William, you've seen already. Frankie Wynne is somewhere, meticulous copy editor. Jill Fulston, superb structural editor. And Pavla Etze, have I said your name right? Who designed our wonderful logo and designed Jane's cover. And he's not here, but I'm going to thank Sam Sullivan, who designed this cover, third novel, and I finally get a cover that works. Thank you, Sam. So, as they say on Strictly, I can reveal, the next author to join Blue Door Press has worked as a teacher and a journalist and is currently a lecturer at Goldsmiths. But he's also written many books. He is Francis Gilbert, the man with the camera. Some of you may know his work. He's the author of a best-selling non-fiction title, I'm a Teacher, Get Me Out of Here, which you may have heard on Radio 4. It garnered rave reviews for the likes of Philip Pullman, and a reviewer in The Independent said, Gilbert writes so well he could give up the day job.
So we're obviously delighted that he's chosen to come to Blue Door Press with his new novel. It's called Who Do You Love? It's a tragic comic story, thoughtful and entertaining. And it explores the big issues of passion, death and grief. Fast-paced, contemporary love story, and a moving exploration of what it means to love and be loved. I'm losing the plot. If it all goes to plan, the novel will be launched in January 2017. If you haven't already done so, go to our website and sign up for our newsletter via the contacts page, so we can keep you informed about all the stuff.
You know why the booze ran out?
We can keep you informed. Go to the website. It's beautiful. Pavla did it.
Thank you all for coming, and the bar is open.